Last Thursday, I stood under a gray Ohio sky and watched them lower my husband into the ground. 43 years of marriage, gone with the thud of dirt on a plain oak coffin. There should have been rows of chairs filled with family, friends, and our two grown children. Instead, it was me, the pastor, and a groundskeeper waiting for us to finish. My son texted me a crying emoji. My daughter sent a heart and a calendar invite for a future visit. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came the next morning, when a bank envelope on my kitchen table told me my husband had died in debt so deep the house I was standing in didn't legally belong to me anymore. And when I dug into the numbers, I realized the truth. My children hadn't just abandoned their father. They had been quietly stripping us bare for years, and I was next. Before I tell you what I did to them, and how my late husband's secret plan turned their lives upside down, tell me in the comments. From which city and country are you watching this? I really do read those. If you believe that family should mean more than money, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the notification bell so you never miss a story about people who think they can walk over the old ones. And what happens when we finally stand up? Now let me take you back to the day I buried my husband alone. My name is Margaret Lane. I'm 69 years old, and I live in a wind-blown town outside Toledo, Ohio, where the biggest excitement most weeks is a high school football game or a church potluck. Last Thursday, the biggest event in my life was supposed to be my husband's funeral. Not the kind of event anyone wants, but one you expect to be full of people who loved him, full of the children we raised. Instead, the funeral home set out 50 gray folding chairs under a canvas tent, and 48 of them stayed empty. The pastor stood at the head of the grave with his little book. The wind tugged his stole sideways. I clutched the handle of my umbrella with both hands so it wouldn't fly away. The casket we chose was simple. No fuss, wind-blown fuss, like my husband Thomas always said. He circled it in a brochure once, years ago, joking, "If I go first, don't let them talk you into something shiny, Maggie. Good wood is good enough." Good wood and an empty crowd. Our daughter Danielle, a corporate strategist in Chicago, texted me that morning. "Mom, I'm so sorry. Board meeting today. Clients flew in. I'll come down on Sunday, and we'll do something special for Dad, okay?" Our son, Brian, a brand partnerships consultant in Austin, sent a voice note I couldn't even get to play in the cemetery's weak cell service. The pastor's voice blurred in the wind. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. I glanced at the 2 empty front row chairs I'd asked them to reserve for our kids. I could see their shapes in my mind. Danielle in some sharp blazer with her hair in a tight bun. Beer Sunday bun Andean in whatever trending streetwear and spotless sneakers he was advertising that week. They stayed ghosts. When the pastor closed his book, he cleared his throat in that way people do when they're about to ruin a moment. "Mrs. Lane," he said softly, I'm sorry to bring this up now, but the funeral director asked me to remind you, there's still an outstanding balance." "Outstanding balance?" I repeated, staring at the flowers on the coffin. "The cemetery fees, the service," he said. "The funeral home was under the impression your family would use the credit line your husband arranged. But there's bun, and it seems there's a problem. The card was declined." Declined. I had lived most of my life in the small, safe territory of a school librarian's salary and my husband's construction work. We never missed a payment, never carried a card balance, Nevit balance, and or bought anything we couldn't fix or reuse. Hearing that word in connection to Thomas felt like hearing someone say he'd robbed a bank. I'll go to the funeral home, I said, though my voice sounded like it belonged to someone much older. I'll sort it out. Of course, of course. The pastor looked relieved. And, Margaret? Yes? He wouldn't meet my eyes. They told me the line of credit was joint with your children. I watched the groundskeeper step forward to begin lowering the coffin into the ground, the winch squeaking in the wind like something complaining. Danielle's unread message blinked on my phone. Brian's voice note still spun in a gray little balance and little gray circle. For the first time since Thomas died, my grief shifted. It didn't go away, but it moved aside just enough to make room for something colder. Suspicion. I left my husband in the ground with 50 empty chairs, and I went looking for answers. And what I found made me realize my kids hadn't just abandoned their father at the end. They'd been planning for that moment for a long time. If you asked my children about their childhood, they'd tell you they grew up in a boring house with second-hand furniture and a mother who insisted books were better than cable TV. They'd complain about hand-me-down coats and summer jobs at the farm stand. What they wouldn't tell you is how much work it takes to build a boring, safe life. Thomas and I married young. He was 22, working for a small concrete company pouring driveways and basement floors. I was 19, shelving books and fixing copy machines in the high school library. We bought the Lane place, a 2-story farmhouse with peeling white paint and 5 acres of land, for a price I still remember like a phone number. We fixed it one paycheck, one weekend, on Little Gray Weekend, and scraped knuckle at a time. Danielle came first. 10 pounds of opinions and lungs. From the moment she could talk, she demanded more. Newer shoes, better snacks, a bigger town. Nobody else in my class still lives way out in the sticks, she'd complain, throwing her backpack on our thrift store sofa. Brian arrived 4 years later, quieter, softer in some ways, but always watching screens. First Saturday morning cartoons, then video games, then whatever app came next. I'm going to get paid for this someday, he used to brag, fingers tapping on controllers. People make a living online, you know, Dad. Thomas would just shake his head and go back to his workbench in the detached garage he converted into a shop. There was always a project, a porch to rebuild, a neighbor's deck, a small contract with the town for picnic tables. He never called himself a business owner. Just a guy who knows his way around a 2x4, he'd say. We weren't rich, but we were steady. We had a tiny emergency fund. The mortgage was paid off early because Thomas hated owing anyone anything. I learned to stretch $1 so far it squeaked. When the kids went off to college, Danielle on scholarships plus loans, Brian to a marketing program he barely attended, I thought we'd done it. We'd launched 2 people into the world with no arrests, no addictions, no weekend, and addictions, and major disasters. But somewhere between their first dorm room and their first city apartments, the way they looked at us shifted. Calls became shorter. Mom, I'm in a cab. Addictions and cab. Can I call you back? Dad, I'm walking into a meeting. Visits turned into, I'll try and maybe next month. When they did come home for holidays, they walked through the house like tourists in a museum of outdated tastes. You guys still don't have a dishwasher? Brian said once, staring at the drying rack as if it were a crime scene. You know you could get a home equity line, right? Danielle told us. You're sitting on land in an appreciating area, and you're not even using it. That's just bad strategy. Thomas laughed that off at the time. The only line I want is the one that says 0 debt, he said. But I watched Danielle's eyes. She looked at our land the way a developer might, measuring, calculating. When Thomas got sick 3 years ago, it started as a cough that wouldn't go away. Then it was just pneumonia. Then we should run a few more tests. And then one day a doctor said stage 4 and palliative. The kids came then. Oh, they came. Not with casseroles or extra hands or offers to sit through chemo sessions. They came with laptops and questions. Dad, have you thought about putting the house in a living trust? It would be easier for us to manage later. Mom, do you know where the deed is? The actual deed? And do you have any investments besides the credit union? I told myself they were being responsible, planning ahead, doing all the things the financial blogs and podcasts say grown children should do. Thomas would squeeze my hand when they left. They mean well, Mags. They just don't know any better. But there were nights he'd sit a little longer in the dark after they went back to the airport, staring at the outlines of his shop through the kitchen window. You have cab. Do you feel like they're visiting someone else? He asked once. What do you mean? Like they think they're visiting a story about poor old country parents instead of the actual people who raised them. I didn't know how to answer that, so I busied myself with dishes. It's what you do when the truth hurts too much to hold. In the last year, the visits changed again. Danielle stopped coming. Travel is complicated with my workload, she'd say. Brian showed up when it suited his content plans. He made a whole series out of helping Dad renovate the old family home. But the moment Thomas got too tired to hold a hammer, Brian set the camera down and flew out for a brand partnership event. When Thomas finally slipped away in the hospital, it was just me and a nurse. The kids couldn't get flights. I told myself grief made people selfish. I told myself they'd show up for the funeral. They didn't. And the day after, when I walked into the funeral home office to pay the bill with my debit card, the director gave me a thin, professional smile and a piece of paper that made my blood run cold. A line of credit in Thomas's name, an eye-watering balance, a note in small type. Co-borrowers, Danielle Lane, Brian Lane. Mrs. Lane, I'm sure this is just a mix-up, the director said. We've been billing the address your daughter provided. There were several large charges in the past 6 months. All approved. Charges, I whispered. He turned the paper around so I could see. My husband's name is is at the top. Then, Skyline Event Group, Chicago, $18,750 Austin Creator Summit, Platinum Sponsorship, $22,400 First-Class Travel, various 6,200 under last payment received. There was a date from 9 months ago. The month Thomas had been in the ICU. Those aren't his charges, I heard myself say. According to the documents, they're joint, the director replied. Signed at your credit union. The credit union we'd used for 30 years. The one down on Main Street between the diner and the barber shop. The one that had sent a thick envelope I hadn't opened yet because I thought I knew everything inside it by heart. I walked out of the funeral home and straight to the credit union, clutching the paper like it might bite me. I thought I was going to find a mistake. Instead, I found out my husband had died owing almost $200,000, and my children were the ones who had walked him into it. And that was before I opened the letter waiting on my kitchen table. The credit union still smelled like coffee and printer ink, the way it always had. There's comfort in places that don't change, even while your whole life is falling apart. Karen, the loan officer I'd known since she was a teller fresh out of high school, came out from behind her desk the moment she saw me. Her eyes were already shiny. "Oh, Margaret," she said, pulling me into a careful hug. "I'm so sorry about Tom." We sent flowers, but I should have come myself. Thank you, I said automatically. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone on the other side of a thick wall. Karen, they say there's a line of credit. Her face changed. Not surprised. Not really. More like dread she'd been putting off. Let's sit in my office, she murmured. She closed the door behind us and pulled up a screen. The blue light made her look older. Margaret, your husband came in here with your children about a year ago, she began. He wasn't himself. He seemed tired. They did most of the talking. She turned the monitor so I could see. There it was. Home equity flex line. Collateral. Lane property, 5 acres. Borrowers. Thomas Lane, primary, Danielle Lane, co., and Brian Lane, co. The available credit, 0.0. The balance, 186,000 and change. Behind it, another account, a smaller signature loan. Borrowers, Danielle Lane, Brian Lane. Co-signer, Thomas Lane. Balance, $38,000, delinquent. Why didn't anyone call me? I whispered. We mailed notices, Karen said. Certified. We called the numbers on file. Danielle answered once. She said she was handling it. And when Thomas came in with them, he said it was fine. He told me not to worry you. I could see it. Thomas, slumped in that chair in his flannel shirt, eyes ringed with the gray circles chemo leaves behind, trying to keep the peace even while our children dragged him into something he didn't fully understand. He trusted them. He shouldn't have. Karen, I said slowly, is our house. There's a foreclosure clock, she admitted, wincing. We've been holding it, quietly, hoping, but corporate is pushing. I can maybe buy you another 30 days. Maybe. 30 days. 30 days before the house we'd paid off, board by board, lawnmower by lawnmower, would be on an auction site. I drove home in a fog, the world outside my windshield blurred by more than just the December drizzle. The thick envelope from the credit union sat on the kitchen table exactly where I'd left it 2 days earlier. I tore it open with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Notices, past due letters, a formal intent to foreclose, all addressed to Thomas Lane and co-borrowers. and co-borrowers. The last one, sent just a week before he died, was stamped in large print, final notice. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I walked to the landline on the wall, the same beige phone we'd had since the kids were in middle school, and I dialed. Danielle picked up on the third ring. "Hey, Mom," she said brightly, as if we were talking about brunch plans. "I was just thinking of you. How did the service go?" "It was yesterday," I said, "and you weren't there." Silence. Then a rustle like she was shifting her headset. "Mom, we've talked about this. I told you about the board meeting. I lit a candle here in the office. There's a second mortgage on the house," I cut in. I didn't recognize my own voice. Flat, level. "A line of credit. You signed on to it. So did your brother." Another silence, longer this time. "Okay," she said finally, tones changing, moving into her deal with a problem client voice. "Yes, Dad and I set up a facility. It was smart leverage, Mom. We talked to a planner." "You used it," I said. "For events, for flights, for sponsorships, for things that have nothing to do with this house." "That's not fair," she snapped. "Those were business investments." I told Dad my promotion track depended on impressing the right people. "Brian's brand deals need visibility." "So you took the equity out of our home," I said, each word carefully placed, "while your father was dying." "That's dramatic," she said. "We're going to pay it back. Once the bonus hits, once Brian's next campaign closes." "He's dead, Danielle. The payments were never made." They're foreclosing. She exhaled. Okay, okay. Don't panic. Just don't talk to anyone until I get there. I'll come down this weekend, and we'll restructure. Maybe you shouldn't be handling this alone right now. The way she said it, you shouldn't be handling this, made something twist in my gut. I buried my husband by myself, I said quietly. I can answer a phone call. Mom, she said, shifting back into soft condescension. Grief clouds judgment. Let me and Brian manage the financial piece. That's our world. Just don't sign anything, okay? And if anyone calls, tell them to speak to me. Danielle, I asked, did you ever tell your father exactly how much you were taking? Her voice went cool. He signed the documents, Mom. He was a grown man. I hung up before I could say something that would burn the line forever. I called Brian next. He answered like he always did, half distracted, with some party roaring in the background. Ma, hey, you okay? The house is in foreclosure, I said. There was a beat. The music dropped. Whoa, hold on. I heard a door close. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the home equity line with your name on it, I said. The one that paid for something called Austin Creator Summit Platinum Sponsorship. Oh, that. He tried to laugh, but it came out thin. Mom, that's just how business works now. You front some costs, you build visibility, you co-borrowers, visibility, and cash out later. Dad got it. He wanted to help. Did he? I asked. When exactly did you explain to him that he could lose his house? Look, you're upset, and that's understandable, Brian said. But you're not this visibility, and this isn't really your lane. Finance and stuff is complicated, okay? Danielle and I have it under control. Don't go freaking out to the bank. That just makes things messy. Messy? We're already working on a plan, he said quickly. I've got an agency call tomorrow. There's a huge apparel collab in the works. Once that lands, the line is basically covered. Trust us. This is what we do. You know that moment when you realize you've been standing in the same spot for years, and the floor under you has been quietly rotting the whole time? That's what it felt like, listening to my son tell me my house was just content collateral. I ended the call. In the sudden quiet of the kitchen, the refrigerator hum sounded like a jet engine. The house I thought we owned, in full, clear, this clear, and proud, was nothing but numbers on a screen. And those numbers belonged to my kids' business plans. I sat down at the table, the credit union letter spread out in front of me, and noticed something I'd missed earlier. Under the final notice, in small handwriting, I recognized immediately there was a sticky note. Thomas's cramped letters. Mags, Sheklear, Chekik the blue box in the shop. Use the key in my Bible, don't show the kids. My husband was not a man who left notes. He preferred to just do things. If he'd written that, something was very, very wrong. And whatever it was, he had wanted me to find it after he was gone. Before I opened that blue box, I thought my children were just selfish and careless. After I opened it, I realized they were something worse, and that my husband had seen it coming long before I did. If you think using your sick father's house as a business credit card is bad, wait. Wait until you hear what my kids tried next. Keep listening, because the real betrayal and the start of my revenge was still to come. Thomas kept his shop like a second home. Every tool had its place. Every scrap of wood had a purpose, or at least the possibility of one. I hadn't gone out there since he died. It smelled like him. Sawdust, oil, a chway oil, andant of the peppermint gum he always chewed to keep from smoking. The blue box sat on the top shelf above his workbench, half hidden behind a coil of extension cord. I dragged over an old stool and climbed carefully, my knees reminding me I wasn't 30 anymore. The box was metal, with a little combination lock hanging from the latch, but the note had said, "Key in my Bible," so I brought the whole thing back to the house. His Bible was where it had always been, on the nightstand, a bookmark stuck somewhere in Psalms. I lifted it, and a small brass key fell onto the comforter. I took the key and the box to the kitchen table, the same table where we'd done homework with the kids, sorted taxes, and eaten every family dinner for decades. For a moment, I just sat there, the key resting in my palm, the weight of it strangely heavy. Then I unlocked the box. Inside was not what I expected. No gun, no stacks of cash, no love letters from some secret second life. There were folders, neatly labeled manila folders, a spiral notebook, a cheap thumb drive. The first folder said, Lane Oil, and said, Lane Land Trust. Chart said, Lane Charterer Documents. I frowned. We didn't have a trust. At least I didn't think we did. The second, Purchase Agreements, Northridge Parcels. The third, Meeting Notes, WLC. I opened the first one. About 10 years ago, long before Thomas got sick, long before the kids started talking about unlocking equity, he had quietly created a legal entity, Lane Community, Land Trust. Co-trustees, Thomas Lane and Margaret Lane. Purpose, to preserve agricultural and natural land in Lucas County for community benefit, to provide affordable long-term leases for small farmers and local projects. I had never signed anything like this. At least, I didn't remember it. Then I saw my own signature at the bottom of the second page, the date. It hit me in a rush. That afternoon at the kitchen table when Thomas had slid some papers over and said, "Just some stuff to make sure if anything happens to me, the land doesn't get chopped up by strangers." I'd signed it between stirring soup and flipping laundry, trusting him the way I always did. The trust owned our 5-acre homestead, and according to the second folder, it owned a lot more. I flipped through purchase agreement after purchase agreement. Tiny slivers of land, bought over years, all around our town's northern edge. An acre here from a widow moving into assisted living. 2 acres there from a farmer whose kids didn't want to plant anymore. Prices that looked like they belonged to another decade. Every deed had the same buyer, Lane Community Land Trust. "Thomas," I whispered, "what did you do?" The spiral notebook held his handwriting, notes from meetings with LC, whoever that was. LC says Wind Company Scouty, charter the Wind Company Ising sites. Our ridge is ideal. If we hold parcels, we can negotiate community terms. Kids think we're sitting on wasted equity. They don't see the bigger picture. Mags does, even if she doesn't know it yet. I felt like the world had been hiding another version of my husband right in front of me. While I thought he just liked to keep busy with odd jobs and little projects, he had been quietly buying up overlooked pieces of land, putting them in a trust with my name on it. Plath Wind Company Izit. And danning something. The thumb drive, when I plugged it into our old laptop, held one folder. To open if I'm gone. There was a video file. I clicked it. Thomas filled the screen, sitting in his shop chair, the light from the overhead bulb making a little halo around his thinning hair. He was wearing his flannel shirt, the one with a burn mark from the time he leaned too close to the grill. "Hey, Mags," he said, smiling, though his eyes were tired. "If you're watching this, it means I didn't make it." I laughed and sobbed at the same time. "Idiot," I whispered. "I know you hate videos," he went on, but I'm not sure how much I'll remember to tell you in person. The meds make me fuzzy, and he rubbed his forehead. And I know the kids will try to rush in and handle things. Sew it. And I need you to hear this from me first. He explained it more simply than any lawyer could have. 10 years ago, a regional energy company had approached him about buying a strip of our land to run underground cable. He said no. He didn't like the way they talked about taking advantage of the fact that old farmers didn't know market values. So he started learning about easements, about land trusts, about how you can structure ownership so that land is used but not sold out from under people. I didn't tell you all the details because I didn't want you to worry, he admitted. I just told you we were helping neighbors keep their land in the family, and that was true. But I was also making sure that when the next big company comes sniffing around, they talk to us, the trust, on our terms, not theirs. He coughed, pressed a handkerchief to his mouth, and then continued. The kids. I love them. You know I do. But somewhere along the way, they started seeing us as a resource, not people. A pile of assets waiting to be reallocated. I watched the way they talked about us when they thought we weren't listening. He swallowed. I knew they'd push the idea of a home equity line. Smart leverage, as Danielle calls it, so I set up something else first. He leaned in close to the camera. The house is in the trust, Mags. Has been for years. That mortgage they talked me into? He smiled, a little sadly. The bank thinks they have first dibs, but legally they don't own what they think they do. The trust does. There's a clause in the deed. Lydia helped me with it. Lydia L.C. Lydia Carruthers. You remember her? She was 2 grades below Danny in school. Went off to law school, came back all big-time real estate attorney. She's the trust's counsel, and yours if you want her. He took a deep breath. I let the kids rope me into a line in my personal name. They were going to do it anyway, and this way I could at least see it. But I never put the actual property into their hands. They tried to use my name as collateral for their games. They didn't realize I moved the game board years ago. He smiled, tired but satisfied. When the bank really looks, they'll realize the only thing backing those loans is the kids' personal guarantees. Not the land, not your roof. The worst that happens to you is a few tense meetings. The worst that happens to them, well, his face grew serious. I wasn't sure, Mags, what you'd want to do about them. Part of me hoped I was just being paranoid. Part of me hoped they'd show up at my bedside with soup instead of spreadsheets. He shook his head. But just in case, I set up one more thing. If they ever try to declare you incompetent or get control of your assets, Lydia has instructions. You call her. Tell her the phrase, Sunflower Ridge. That means you're in trouble, and it's time to pull the plug on their little party. He looked straight into the camera. For a moment I saw the young man who had asked me to the spring dance with hands still rough from pouring concrete. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'm sorry I didn't raise them better. I'm sorry you might have to be the one to show them what consequences look like. I know you're kinder than I am, even if you pretend you're not. He smiled again. But if they come for you, Mags, don't you dare roll over. I didn't spend my life building good wood just so they could chop it up for content. The video ended. I sat there for a long time in the blue light of the laptop screen, surrounded by papers that said my life was both more vulnerable and more protected than I'd ever imagined. The kids thought they'd found a way to turn us into a credit source. Thomas had quietly turned himself into something else, a firewall. There was just one problem. He'd predicted almost everything, except how far our children were willing to go. Because while I was sitting there replaying his message, Danielle was already sending me another one. Mom, I and Brian are driving in tonight. Don't talk to any bankers or lawyers without us. We're worried about you. This is a lot to handle alone. Love you. They weren't coming home to comfort me. They were coming home to contain me. They rolled into the driveway just after dark, headlights cutting across the bare maple trees and the sagging basketball hoop Thomas never had the heart to take down. Danielle arrived in a silver crossover with a company logo on the side, the kind that told the world she was important enough for a fleet car. Brian pulled up behind her in a rented SUV with some influencer's logo plastered on a magnet over the door. They didn't hug me right away. Danielle set her leather bag on the hall table and did a quick scan of the living room, like she was appraising it. Brian hauled in 2 rolling suitcases, the kind you don't pack for a quick visit. "Hey, Ma," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek while still staring at his phone. You look good." "I buried your father yesterday," I said. Good isn't really the word. Danielle's mouth tightened. "Let's not start off combative," she said, dropping her coat over the back of the couch. "We're here to help." "To help what?" I asked. "Everything," she replied. "The house, the accounts, the medical bills, your situation." "My situation," I repeated. She cleared her throat. "Mom, grief at your age can be destabilizing. That's not an insult. It's just fact. Brian and I have been talking, and we agree it's not fair to have all of this on your shoulders. So we're going to take some of it off." They guided me into the dining room like I was a guest in my own home. Papers were already coming out. Folders with tabs, a tablet, and printouts. It occurred to me then that they had planned this meeting long before the funeral. "We talked to a friend of mine at the firm," Danielle said, sitting at the head of the table like she'd bought it. "There are options. We can consolidate the debts, restructure the payments, and maybe even negotiate a partial forgiveness if we show financial hardship." "Whose hardship?" I asked. She frowned. "All of us, Mom. This affects the whole family." Brian chimed in. "Look, the content space is brutal right now. Algorithms have been a mess. Brands are net 60 on payments. When the equity line is paid down, it becomes an asset again. We just need to get ahead of the foreclosure narrative before it hits your credit too hard." "My credit," I said. "Not yours?" He shifted. "Well, it's all connected." Danielle slid a document toward me. "Here's the first step. We set up a durable power of attorney. Standard stuff. You appoint me as your financial agent so I can talk to banks, negotiate with creditors, and manage the paperwork. It'll be easier if we present one professional point of contact instead of, a grieving spouse." There it was, the first move. I looked down at the paper. Durable power of attorney, Principal Margaret Lane. Agent, Danielle Lane. "You'd be able to open and close accounts?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "On your behalf, only with your interests in mind. Sell property, if necessary. Take out new loans?" She hesitated. "Only if absolutely needed. Mom, nobody's going to do anything reckless. This is about protecting you. The bank told us you've been calling them sounding upset. We don't want them taking advantage of your emotional state." I thought of Karen's face at the credit union. She hadn't looked like a predator. She'd looked like someone trapped between compassion and corporate policy. "You talked to the bank," I said slowly. "Of course," Danielle replied. "We needed full visibility. And Mom, they're worried. They mentioned you sounded confused. That's not something we can ignore." Brian slid another paper forward, This one had a clinic logo at the top. "We set up an appointment for you tomorrow," he said. "Just a wellness check with a geriatric specialist. Nothing scary. He'll evaluate your cognitive load and make sure you're coping okay. It'll actually help with negotiations if we can show you're under professional supervision." It clicked, piece by piece, like a puzzle I hadn't wanted to see. They weren't just trying to take over the finances. They were building a case that I shouldn't be in charge of my own mind. "Mental capacity evaluations," Danielle said, as if reading my thoughts, "are standard now, Mom. Courts take elder financial abuse very seriously, but they also don't like seeing assets mismanaged because someone is declining. We're trying to keep this from becoming a legal nightmare." "For whom?" I asked. She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "For all of us." Brian leaned in. "Mom, do you remember when you accidentally paid the water bill twice last year? You called me in a panic about it. Stuff like that adds up." "I was tired," I said. "Your father was in chemo." "Exactly," Danielle cut in. "That's why we need a more structured approach now. Dad isn't here to buffer things anymore." They thought I was cornered, old, alone, surrounded by words I didn't understand. They were half right. I was alone, and I was old, but I understood more than they realized, and I knew something they didn't. Thomas had already moved the pieces off this board. "I'm not signing anything tonight," I said, pushing the papers back. Danielle's jaw tightened. "Mom, don't be stubborn. We drove 8 hours to help you. The clock is ticking on the foreclosure. Every day you wait, the worse your position gets." "I said," I repeated, "I'm not signing anything tonight." "We'll see what Dr. Hartman says tomorrow," Brian muttered, gathering the documents. I watched them retreat to their old bedrooms, now guest rooms. Their voices rose and fell down the hallway, frustrated, angry, but not with themselves, with me. They didn't know that while they slept in the rooms their father had painted and repainted, I sat in his shop with a cheap flip phone I'd almost thrown out last year. I scrolled past everyone I knew until I found a number stored under LC, "Do not lose." I dialed. The phone rang twice, then 3 times. "Hello?" A woman's voice, tired but alert. "Is this Lydia Carruthers?" I asked. "It is. Who's calling?" "This is Margaret Lane," I said. "Thomas Lane's wife. Or widow, I guess." Her inhale was sharper than I expected. "Mrs. Lane, I'm so sorry. He was one of the good ones." "He thought the same of you," I said. "He told me to call you if things went sideways. He told me to say Sunflower Ridge." The silence on the line changed. "All right," she said. "Tell me everything." I told her about the funeral, the line of credit, and the foreclosure. About Danielle's helpful documents and the scheduled capacity evaluation. When I finished, there was a lower, more dangerous kind of quiet. "Mrs. Lane," Lydia said finally, "I've been expecting some version of this. Your husband was worried. He didn't want to believe his kids were capable of what you're describing, but he didn't want to leave you unprotected either." "Is it true?" I asked. "About the trust, about the land." She confirmed it. Every acre, every clause. "The bank can posture," she said, "but they don't own what they think they own. At worst, they can chase the co-borrower's personal assets. The trust is insulated." "And me?" I asked. "Can they really have me declared incompetent?" "If you refuse all evaluations and start melting down in public, maybe," she said. "But if what you told me is accurate, this doctor appointment is more about building a paper trail than about your well-being." "So what do I do?" "You meet with him," she said. "You answer his questions calmly. You don't give him anything to hang a diagnosis on. Meanwhile, I'll get some paperwork in motion on my end. Your kids think they're the only ones who know how to pull levers. That's incorrect. Her tone had the same iron under it I'd heard in Thomas's video. Lydia, I said, are we going to ruin them? I don't ruin people, she replied. I help consequences find them. You and I will decide how far that goes. But first, we stop them from touching your house, your accounts, and your freedom. Deal? Deal, I said. Thomas had been right. I was kinder than he was. Even in that moment, I didn't want my children in jail or on the street. I just wanted them to stop treating us like a resource to be mined. I wanted them to remember, even for 1 second, that we were people. The next morning, when Dr. Hartman rang the doorbell right on time with his little leather bag and rehearsed frown, I poured him coffee at my husband's table and let him try to hang a label around my neck. He wasn't prepared for the fact that I also had a label for him. Dr. Hartman looked exactly like you'd expect a geriatric specialist on a house call to look. Gray hair, neat beard, round glasses, and a cardigan under his coat. A clipboard tucked under his arm like a prop. Mrs. Lane, he said, stepping into the foyer. I'm so sorry for your loss. Your children asked me to check in on you. Come in, doctor, I said. We're all in the kitchen. Danielle and Brian were already sitting at the table, coffee mugs in front of them, faces arranged in identical masks of concern. For a second, with the morning light on their features, I saw them as toddlers again. Then the illusion slipped. Dr. Hartman shook their hands like they'd done this all before. Maybe they had. We sat. Now, he began, tone gentle. This isn't an exam you can pass or fail. It's just a way to see how you're coping, cognitively, after a major loss. Of course, I said. He asked me my name, my address, the date, and the day of the week. I answered. He asked me to remember 3 words: apple, table, penny, and repeat them at the end. I did. He asked me to subtract 7 from 100, then 7 again. I took my time, even though I'd done more complicated math balancing budgets for decades. While I counted, I watched him watch me. Every hesitation, every sigh, every moment my eyes wandered to the window where Thomas's shop stood, seemed to please him in a clinical way. Data points. Have you been feeling confused? He asked. Forgetful, making mistakes with your bills. Sometimes, I said honestly. Sometimes I walk into a room and forget why I came. Sometimes I start making dinner and realize I never took the chicken out of the freezer. My husband died last week. It's distracting. Of course, he said soothingly. Grief can mimic early cognitive decline. That's what we're trying to distinguish. Your children tell me you've been calling the bank repeatedly, sounding upset. I've been trying to understand why a paid-off house has a foreclosure notice, I replied. Would that upset you? He didn't answer. Danielle jumped in. Mom, that's exactly what we're trying to help with. You're fixated on the house because you're scared. Dr. Hartman can give us a neutral assessment. We want to make sure nothing serious is developing. He scribbled something on his pad. Do you ever hear your husband's voice? He asked me, watching closely. Or feel like he's still in the room? I thought of Thomas's video, his face on the laptop, his voice telling me not to roll over. Yes, I said quietly. I talk to him all the time, in my head, in the shop. That's just marriage. He nodded, as if that were the correct answer. At the end, he asked me to repeat the 3 words. I did. He asked me to copy a drawing of intersecting pentagons. My lines were a little shakier than they would have been 10 years ago, but they were accurate. "Well," he said finally, setting his pen down, "from what I can see today, you're within normal parameters for someone your age and circumstances. I don't see evidence of dementia or severe cognitive impairment." Danielle frowned. "But her decision-making is her own," he said firmly. "You may not agree with every choice she makes, that's family, but she is capable of understanding information and weighing options." Brian shifted, frustrated. "Doc, you said on the phone—" "I said I would assess," Hartman replied, a little steel entering his tone. "And that's what I've done. If things change, we can revisit it. For now, I'd recommend grief counseling, practical support, and perhaps sitting down together with a neutral financial advisor." He stood. Danielle's mouth opened, then shut. She was smart enough not to argue directly with someone whose signature she needed. I walked him to the door. When we were out of earshot of the kitchen, he leaned toward me. "Mrs. Lane," he said quietly, "I don't know the full story here, but I do know this. You're sharper than they think. Be careful who you sign over power to." "Thank you, Doctor," I said. As his car pulled out of the driveway, my flip phone buzzed in my apron pocket. A text from an unknown number. "Hartman cleared you. Good. We moved to Phase 2. L. Lydia. Phase 2 turned out to be faster than I expected. 2 hours later, just as Danielle and Brian were ramping up their sales pitch again in the living room, now with printed amortization tables and bullet points on risk mitigation, a dark sedan rolled up to the house, followed by a county sheriff's SUV and a battered pickup I recognized. Lydia stepped out of the sedan, tall in a navy coat, hair pulled back, a leather portfolio in her hand. The sheriff climbed out of his vehicle, hat low against the wind. The man in the pickup killed his engine and nodded to me through the window. "Mr. Jensen, owner of the local feed store. One of the people who'd sold Thomas a sliver of land in exchange for a long-term lease and some security in his old age." My kids watched through the front window with matching expressions of alarm. "Mom," Danielle said, standing. "What did you do?" "I called my lawyer," I said. "Just like you told me to." Lydia didn't knock. She stepped into my house like she had a right to be there. And legally, as counsel for the trustee of the Lane Community Land Trust, she did. "Mrs. Lane," she said, shaking my hand in the foyer. "Good to see you in person. I'm sorry it took such a terrible reason." "Thank you for coming," I said. She turned to my children, assessing them the way Dr. Hartman had assessed me. "You must be Danielle and Brian," she said. "I've heard quite a bit about you from your father." Danielle recovered first. "And you are?" "Attorney for the Lane Community Land Trust," Lydia replied. "And, as of this morning, also counsel for your mother regarding any and all matters involving the house, the land, and the loans you involved your father in." Brian laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "Loans we involved him in? He signed them. He wanted to help us." Lydia opened her portfolio and pulled out a stack of documents clipped neatly together. "Sheriff Collins," she said, glancing back at the officer. "Would you mind stepping in? I suspect we're going to need a witness for this." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Sure thing, Miss Carruthers. Margie, are you doing okay?" "For now," I said. Danielle crossed her arms. "This is getting out of hand. Mom, you can't just bring in some small-town lawyer to—" "Danielle," Lydia said, voice smooth but edged. "I do a bit more than title searches these days. I represent land trusts all over the state, including this one." She laid the first set of papers on the coffee table. "Let's start with a simple clarification," she said. You seem to be under the impression that the home equity line you drew on is secured by this property. It is not. She tapped the top page. This is the deed transferring the Lane homestead into the Lane Community Land Trust 10 years ago. Signed by Thomas and Margaret Lane. Recorded with the county. Legally, the trust owns this land. Not your father. Not your mother. Certainly not you. Danielle snatched the paper up, scanning it. Her face drained of color. That can't be right, she stammered. The bank made a mistake, Lydia said coolly. The mortgage documents you brought your father in to sign list him as the owner, but they never checked the chain of title properly. They took his signature and your co-borrower guarantee at face value. That's their problem, not ours. Brian grabbed another sheet, eyes darting. So, what? The loan is invalid? They can't foreclose? His voice held a flicker of hope. Oh, they can still pursue the debt, Lydia said. But legally, they can't take anything that belongs to the trust. That leaves your personal assets. She slid a second stack of papers forward. As of 9 a.m. today, the Lane Community Land Trust has purchased the delinquent home equity loan and the signature loan from the credit union at a discount. The trust is now your creditor. Danielle's head snapped up. You bought our debt? Your father bought it, Lydia corrected. Years ago, he authorized the trust to buy any obligation in his name if it ever went into distress. We just executed that option this morning once your mother gave the go-ahead. Brian's mouth opened and closed. So you own our loans. You're just the bank now? Better than the bank, Lydia said. We're also your landlord, technically, on several parcels your little brand campaigns shot content on without permits. But we can table that for now. She looked directly at me. Mrs. Lane, as trustee, you have some decisions to make about your borrowers here. My heart pounded, but my voice stayed steady. What are my options? Well, she said, we could call the loans immediately due, send them into default, pursue judgments, garnish wages, and attach assets. It would be swift. Danielle's hand flew to her throat. Brian actually swayed on his feet. Or, Lydia continued, you could offer them new terms. The sheriff cleared his throat. Ma'am, I should also mention that Mr. Jensen here has a complaint and supporting documents about a certain marketing event that used his barn without proper insurance. If you'd like, we can address that once we're done with the financial side. Brian looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. My children had come home to stage a quiet coup over a grieving widow. Instead, they were standing in my living room in front of a lawyer, a sheriff, and a neighbor they'd burned, facing the kind of consequences you don't fix with a Venmo transfer. And I still hadn't told them about the wind company, or the fact that their father's little projects were about to become the biggest thing anyone in our town had ever seen. The sheriff and Mr. Jensen stepped into the kitchen with Lydia to go over incident reports and timelines, leaving me alone with Danielle and Brian in the living room. They looked smaller than they had the night before. Not younger, smaller. What did you do, Mom? Brian whispered, dropping onto the couch. What your father and I should have done a long time ago, I said. We stopped pretending you wouldn't hurt us if it suited you. That's not fair, Danielle snapped, but the edge had dulled. We were trying to use leverage. That's normal. Everyone does it. You used your dying father's signature, I said. On loans you knew he didn't fully understand. You put his home at risk and didn't even bother to show up to his funeral. If that's normal in your world, maybe the world needs fixing. Brian ran a hand through his hair. So what now? You take our bank accounts? Our cars? You want us living in a tent behind the feed store? I thought of Thomas's video. I'm sorry, you might have to be the one to show them what consequences look like. I don't want you homeless, I said. I want you honest. Lydia came back in and sat on the arm of the chair across from us. I've drafted 2 paths, she said. Mrs. Lane, you tell me where your heart is. I'll make the law follow. 2 paths? Danielle asked warily. Lydia nodded. Option 1, full enforcement. We file suit, obtain judgments, and pursue wage garnishment and liens on any assets you own now or in the future. We don't touch your mother's Social Security, her pension, or anything tied to the trust. We simply treat you like any other pair of delinquent borrowers who lied on applications and misused funds. Danielle flinched at the word lied. Option 2, Lydia continued, is unconventional. The trust can restructure your loans into service contracts. Instead of paying in dollars you don't have, you pay in time. Time? Brian echoed. Your father set up this trust not just to protect land, but to launch a project, Lydia explained. We've been negotiating with a mid-size wind energy company and a state grant program. The Lane Community Land Trust will be overseeing the development of a small wind farm and an agricultural training center out on the North Ridge. It's going to need staff, full-time, for years. Danielle frowned. What does that have to do with our loans? I took a breath. If you choose option 2, I said, you move back here. You work for the trust. Long term. Danielle, with your corporate and project management background, you'd run operations, budgets, schedules, paperwork, and community outreach. Brian, with your marketing connections, you'd handle communications, grant reporting, social media, and educational content. You'd earn modest salaries, nothing like what you're used to, and every paycheck would be garnished until your combined debt, including the money you drew from the line, plus interest and damages, is paid back. Silence. That could take decades, Danielle said weakly. Probably, Lydia agreed. Your father estimated 20 to 25 years depending on performance and raises. Less if you live frugally and take on extra responsibilities. More if you don't. Brian laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. You're talking about turning us into trust employees? For life? I'm talking about giving you a way to fix what you broke without handing you to a collection agency that doesn't care if you eat, I said. You'd have roofs over your heads, honest work, a chance to do something worthwhile instead of chasing approval from people who don't know your names. And if we say no? Danielle asked. Lydia spread her hands. Then option 1 goes into effect. The trust files immediately. Sheriff Collins starts serving papers. Your credit is already damaged. It will be destroyed. Any employer who runs a background check will see judgments. Any partner who spends 2 minutes Googling your names will see lawsuits. And your mother will sleep in a house you can never touch. Brian swallowed hard. You can't do this, Danielle said, but there was no conviction behind it. We're your children. You should have remembered that, I said quietly, before you tried to make me your liability. Brian's eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink away. I have a life in Texas, Mom. Friends, a scene. I can't just move back here and become some small-town social media manager for tractors and windmills. Then you choose option 1, Lydia said. Live whatever life that leaves you. Danielle stared at the floor. What about Eleanor? Her girlfriend. The one we'd only ever seen in Christmas photos because Chicago is a lot. You wouldn't like it here. She can visit, I said. Or not. That's between you and her. I'm done bending over backward to make things easy for people who wouldn't cross state lines for their father's burial. Lydia let the silence stretch. I'll give you until tomorrow morning, she said. 9 a.m. You can talk to each other. Call whoever you like. But you don't leave this house, and you don't touch a single account. Sheriff Collins has already placed temporary holds where necessary. If you try to run, we default to option 1 immediately. She handed them each a single sheet, terms summarized in simple language. As she walked me to the door to leave, she lowered her voice. You're sure? She asked. This isn't just about punishment. It binds you to them for a long time. I know, I said. But Thomas didn't set all this up just to watch them burn from wherever he is. He believed people can grow up, even late. And you? I looked back at my kids, my grown, selfish, frightened kids, huddled over the paper like it was a test they hadn't studied for. I believe in consequences, I said, and in work. If they can't learn love, maybe they can at least learn responsibility. Lydia nodded. I'll be back in the morning then. That night I heard their voices through the thin walls, Danielle on the phone hissing into the darkness. I don't know, Elle. Would you uproot your life for 20 years to help me shovel my own grave out? Because that's what it feels like. Brian murmuring to someone through a video call. Man, they're serious. It's not just family drama, lawyers and sheriffs and everything. If I bail, I'm radioactive. No brand wants that smoke. I lay awake in the bed I'd shared with Thomas, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was doing the right thing. He'd told me not to roll over. He hadn't told me how hard it would be to watch our kids hit the wall we should have built a long time ago. At 8:59 the next morning, they sat at the kitchen table, pale and sober. Lydia walked in on the dot. Sheriff Collins waited on the porch, arms folded. Well? She asked. Danielle met my eyes for the first time in days. There was no arrogance left in her, only a worn-out kind of anger, mostly at herself. I'll stay, she said. I signed things I shouldn't have. I can't fix that from a condo in Chicago. Eleanor, we'll figure it out. Brian rubbed his face. I don't want this, he muttered. But I also don't want to spend the next decade dodging collection calls and trying to convince sponsors I'm not a thief. He looked at me. I'll work, but I'm not calling you boss. You'll call Lydia that, I said. I'm just the trustee. Lydia slid the contracts across the table. Sign here, here, and here. Welcome to the Lane Community Land Trust. As they signed away the lives they'd built on borrowed money and borrowed respect, my hand shook slightly around my coffee mug. This was my revenge. Not a screaming match, not a slap, not disowning them with a dramatic speech, just a quietly brutal reality. You broke it. You fix it. With years, not apologies. Danielle in steel-toed boots, walking the ridge with surveyors, hair pulled back, arguing about turbine placement. Brian in worn jeans, filming educational videos about soil health instead of unboxing sneakers, stumbling over phrases like regenerative agriculture until they started to sound natural. Reality was slower, messier, and much quieter. The first month was the worst. Danielle moved into her old bedroom, the one with faded posters behind the bookcase indentations. She boxed up her Chicago life into a storage unit and commuted 3 days a week back to untangle her exit from the firm. Her calls with Eleanor grew shorter, then tense. Then, one evening, over the hiss of running water in the kitchen, I heard her whisper, "Then don't wait. You deserve something stable. I can't give you that now." She hung up, leaned against the counter, and cried as quietly as she could. I pretended not to hear from the hall. Brian took longer to let anything sink in. For the first 2 weeks, he treated the trust job like a forced internship, rolling in late, scrolling his phone between tasks, and complaining openly. Lydia was patient, but firm. "Every hour you don't work is another hour on the back end of this," she reminded him. "You can wallow or you can pay it down. Your call." The sheriff's temporary holds on their accounts turned into formal garnishments once the judgments were filed, and then transferred to the trust. Every paycheck they got from the project's grant-funded payroll had a chunk automatically routed back toward principal and interest. Lydia kept a spreadsheet. I saw the line creep down slowly, painfully slowly. Some people in town judged me. At the grocery store, one of the church ladies pulled me aside. "Margaret, I heard your young'uns are back under your roof. It's so nice you're letting them regroup. Kids make mistakes." "They're not regrouping," I said. "They're working." She blinked. "Well, yes, I heard that too. But all this talk of lawsuits and garnishments, they're your blood. Isn't that harsh?" I thought of Thomas, sitting in his shop with a chemo port in his chest, trying to focus on wood grain while his son pitched sponsorship packages he couldn't afford. "What's harsh," I said, "is letting your children believe they can walk through life without consequences. We tried that way. It didn't work." Word about the trust's unusual arrangement spread through our small town the way news always does. Fast, distorted, but with a grain of truth. Some people approved. Some shook their heads. Through it all, the project moved forward. The wind company signed. Crews came and went. The ridge transformed from scrubby fields to a line of sleek white turbines, slow blades turning against the sky. Danielle found her rhythm. I watched her in meetings with engineers and county officials. She was good. Very good. The same skills she'd used to impress corporate clients translated just fine to rural stakeholders. She learned to present budgets in language that made sense to farmers, not boards. Brian started a YouTube channel for the trust. Not about himself this time, but about the work. Short, clear videos explaining why the turbines were where they were, how lease payments supported local families, and how the training center would teach kids skills that didn't require leaving town. He still cared about views and engagement, but he cared about accuracy too. Lydia made sure of that. At home, things were awkward. We shared a kitchen, but not much else, especially at first. Mornings were polite. Evenings were full of quiet typing, exhausted showers, and doors closing softly. Sometimes I'd catch Brian staring at the wall where his old sports trophies used to hang, before he'd declared them childish and packed them away. Sometimes I'd walk past Danielle's door and hear her practicing saying I was wrong under her breath, like a foreign phrase. One night, about 3 months in, the power went out in a thunderstorm. No turbines were hooked up yet, so we were back to candles and flashlights. We ended up in the living room together, more by accident than design, each of us holding our own little circle of light. "This house is so loud when it's quiet," Brian said suddenly. "It's old," I replied. "It's real," Danielle said. "My apartment was so insulated I couldn't hear weather, or my own thoughts half the time." We sat there, listening to the storm, and for a moment, we were just 3 people waiting it out. The next morning, Brian left a cup of coffee on the table by my Bible. No note, just the mug. It was a start. 6 months after the funerals and the foreclosure letters and Thomas's video, the training center was ready enough for a soft opening. We held a small ceremony, not a big one, just neighbors, a few county officials, and some representatives from the grant agency. A banner hung over the entrance. Lane Ridge Center, in memory of Thomas Lane. I stood at the makeshift podium, hands resting on the edge to steady myself, looking out at faces I'd known for decades, and some I'd only met through this project. Thomas believed land shouldn't be something people use each other to get, I said. He believed it should be something we take care of together. He didn't live to see this building finished, but he laid every foundation. In the back, I saw Brian fiddling with a camera on a tripod, making sure the audio levels were right. Danielle stood near the sign-in table, checking that name tags were spelled correctly, intercepting questions before they reached me. After the speeches, Maria from the credit union, Karen's boss, pulled me aside. I wasn't sure how this would all shake out, she admitted. When Lydia called about buying the loans, I thought you were being vindictive. But seeing them here, doing the work, she shook her head. It's different. They're different, I said. Not entirely, but more than they were. That night, after the last folding chair was stacked and the lights were off, Danielle knocked on my bedroom door. Come in, I said. She stepped in, looking older than 37, not in a bad way, just real. I need to say something, she said, standing awkwardly by the dresser. I waited. I have done a lot of terrible things, she said slowly. To you, to Dad, to people at work. I've rationalized them as ambition, as a strategy, as everyone does. That doesn't change what they were. She swallowed. I still think what you and Dad did with the trust was extreme, she added. But sitting across from farmers who never had anyone in their corner and realizing I almost turned my own parents into another transaction, that's a pit in my stomach I don't know if I'll ever get rid of. I set down my book. I know saying I'm sorry doesn't fix 20 years, she said. But I am. And I'm trying to be someone who wouldn't do it again, even if there wasn't a contract forcing me to show up. I studied her face. The hard angles hadn't softened exactly, but they weren't aimed at me anymore. I believe I'm sorry when it comes with I'll do the dishes without being asked, I said. She actually laughed. I can do that. Later, as I turned out the light, I whispered into the dark. You see this, Tom? They're not who we wanted, but they're not who they were. The wind from the ridge turbines, still in test mode, hummed faintly in the distance. For the first time since he died, I slept without waking up every hour. People love revenge stories because they usually end with a clear win. The bad guys lose everything. The good person walks away satisfied, maybe a little hardened, but victorious. Real life is messier. I didn't walk away from this. I stayed, right here in the same farmhouse where Thomas and I raised our children and argued over bills and danced in sock feet on the kitchen floor. My revenge didn't burn their lives down in one satisfying explosion. It strapped them into harnesses and made them pull. Day after day. Week after week. Some mornings I still feel a flash of bitterness when I see Danielle's car in the driveway and remember the shiny company SUV she used to park there, nose pointed toward escape. Some afternoons, when Brian slumps into a chair after filming 3 takes of a video about turbine maintenance, hair full of dust instead of salon product, I have to bite back the instinct to say, you could have chosen differently, so could I. Because here's the part you won't like if you want a perfectly clean moral. I helped make them who they are. Every time I smoothed something over so they didn't have to face a teacher's anger or a late fee. Every time Thomas and I laughed off a selfish comment instead of sitting them down and saying, That's not okay. Every time we accepted disrespect wrapped in a joke because that's just how kids are now, we taught them a lesson. We just didn't like it when they applied it to us. Thomas tried to correct it at the end, the only way he knew how. With structures, with deeds, with trusts and contracts. He built a hard shell around me because he knew I'd never build it myself. My part of the revenge was choosing not to crack that shell when my children pushed against it, crying and cursing and begging and bargaining. So what did revenge give me? It gave me my house. The floors Thomas sanded, and the cabinets he hung. It gave me the view from the kitchen window down to the shop where his blue box once sat, empty now except for a stray screw. It gave me choices. I could have chosen option 1 and walked away, leaving Lydia and the courts to squeeze my kids until there was nothing left. Some days, especially in the beginning, that sounded tempting. But I chose the slow path, the one that might lead somewhere other than permanent hatred. 6 months in, it has given me potential. Danielle still sometimes talks like a consultant in her sleep. Brian still cares too much about likes. They still forget to take the trash out unless the bag is physically blocking their path. But when a farmer comes in angry about a lease term he misread, Danielle doesn't roll her eyes. She listens. When a kid from the high school shows up curious about the turbines, Brian doesn't turn it into a vlog about himself. He turns the camera around and lets the kid talk. And when we sit down to dinner now, even if it's just reheated leftovers, we eat at the same table, not in 3 separate rooms with 3 separate screens. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive them for what they did to their father at the end. I do know this. If Thomas could see them now, heads bent over spreadsheets and grant applications and soil test reports, paying off debts one exhausting day at a time, he'd nod. Not smile, not yet, but nod. He'd say, "Good wood takes time, Mags. You can't rush grains straight." So here's where I leave you. Revenge, for me, wasn't about slamming a door. It was about finally, after a lifetime of making things easier than they should have been, letting the weight of their actions sit where it belonged, on their shoulders, and on mine too, in the shape of hard decisions. Now I want to ask you something. If you were in my place, standing in a paid-off house you almost lost, holding a blue box full of your spouse's last protections, what would you have done? Would you have cut your children off completely and let the law devour them? Or would you have done what I did, tied their future to the work of repairing what they broke, even if it meant you had to see them every day? Tell me in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. If this story made you feel anything, anger, sadness, relief, please hit the like button because it helps more people hear it. Share it with someone who thinks old people don't understand money, or that family is just an ATM with feelings. And if you want more true feeling stories about betrayal, justice, and the quiet kind of revenge that doesn't need a courtroom, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Because as long as there are people who underestimate the ones who raised them, there will be stories like mine. And sometimes, telling them is the sharpest revenge of all.